During one official trip, people familiar with the incident say, quote, Noem had to switch planes after a maintenance issue was discovered, but her blanket wasn't moved to the second plane. Corey Lewandowski then fired a U.S. Coast Guard pilot after Noem's blanket was left behind. Okay, the story continues. It gets even better. The Coast Guard pilot was told to take a commercial flight home.
A United States Coast Guard pilot was fired. They were not fired for incompetence. They were not fired for a safety violation. They were not fired for failing a mission. They were fired because a blanket was left behind on an airplane. A blanket belonging to the Secretary of Homeland Security. At midnight tonight, the government shuts down because the people running the government care more about that blanket than they care about the law. The government of the United States is barreling toward a shutdown at midnight. The funding for the Coast Guard, for FEMA, and for the Transportation Security Administration will lapse. The narrative coming from the White House and House Republicans is that this confrontation is necessary for national security. They claim they are holding the line to protect the homeland. They claim that their demand for funding is about safety and law enforcement. That is a lie. It is a lie proven by the forensic evidence of how the Department of Homeland Security is actually being managed right now. It is a lie proven by the financial reality of the legislation they are trying to force upon the American people. And it is a lie proven by the conduct of the cabinet secretary entrusted with that security, Kristi Noem. We begin with the definition of the lie. The President of the United States and his allies in Congress have repeatedly claimed that their immigration enforcement and their management of the Department of Homeland Security are designed to target violent felons and protect American communities. They claim that the billions of dollars they are demanding are for the safety of the public. House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries identifies the deception directly. He states on the record that the president lied to the American people. Here, play this clip.
Now, the Wall Street Journal also reports that Noem and Lewandowski have been using a luxury 737 MAX jet with a private cabin in the back for their travel, a plane that DHS is in the process of acquiring for approximately $70 million. You can just keep adding all of this up on a little notebook if you would like. The plane is paid for with money from the Big Ugly Bill, and it's supposed to be used for high-profile deportations.
The specific claim made by the administration is that they are targeting dangerous individuals, but the evidence shows otherwise. Leader Jeffries notes that immigration enforcement in this country should be fair, just, and humane. He states that right now, law-abiding immigrant families are being violently targeted and American communities are being brutalized. The administration claims this is about law enforcement, but Leader Jeffries confirms that the Republican majority has zero interest in getting ICE under control. The lie is that this is a debate about safety. The truth, according to the evidence we have today, is that this is a debate about power, brutality, and a slush fund used for personal political gain. Let us look at the forensic evidence found in the reporting from the Wall Street Journal, corroborated by NBC News and MS Now. This evidence dismantles the administration's claim of competence and seriousness. The first piece of evidence is the blanket. According to deep reporting from the Wall Street Journal, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem was traveling on an official trip. She was accompanied by Corey Lewandowski. You know that name. He is a former campaign manager for Donald Trump. He is currently functioning as an advisor inside the Department of Homeland Security. The report states that Secretary Noem had to switch planes after a maintenance issue was discovered. During this transfer, a blanket belonging to Secretary Noem was not moved to the second plane. It was left behind. Here, play this clip.
And the transfer of the blanket did not come with her. And then Corey Lewandowski ousted the pilot for not bringing the blanket along to the second plane. And then they ended up having to reverse the decision, at least temporarily, because they realized they needed someone to fly the plane home.
Oh, that's remarkable. Why would they fire 80% of the career ICE officials or field staff? Don't they need them?
Well, what we hear is that there's a lot of...
The consequence for this error was not a reprimand. It was not a memo. Corey Lewandowski, a man with no line of command authority over military personnel, fired the United States Coast Guard pilot. He fired a pilot because a blanket was left behind. This is not speculation. This is reported by the Wall Street Journal and confirmed by multiple sources. The report details that the pilot was told to take a commercial flight home. The pilot was stranded. Here, play this clip.
Okay, the story continues. It gets even better. The Coast Guard pilot was told to take a commercial flight home when they reached their destination, but they eventually reinstated the pilot because no one else was available to fly them home. What a story. Now, surprise, surprise, a DHS spokeswoman declined to address that particular episode when asked about it by the Journal. But let's just pause and put a finer point on that. Kristi Noem and her, let's just call him companion, Corey Lewandowski, tried to fire a Coast Guard pilot just because the Secretary of Homeland Security left her blankie on the plane.
They were eventually reinstated. Why? Not because Lewandowski realized he was wrong, not because Secretary Noem intervened to stop this abuse of power. They reinstated the pilot because no one else was available to fly them home. That is the forensic evidence of how the Department of Homeland Security is operating. It is not operating to protect the homeland. It is operating to service the personal comfort of the secretary and the ego of her advisor. Here, play this clip.
Now, the Wall Street Journal also reports that Noem and Lewandowski have been using a luxury 737 MAX jet with a private cabin in the back for their travel, a plane that DHS is in the process of acquiring for approximately $70 million. You can just keep adding all of this up on a little notebook if you would like. The plane is paid for with money from the Big Ugly Bill, and it's supposed to be used for high-profile deportations.
The evidence of this function continues. We have reports regarding Corey Lewandowski's attempt to obtain a weapon. The Wall Street Journal reports that Lewandowski made it known to top ICE officials that he wanted a law enforcement badge and a federally issued gun. Corey Lewandowski is not a law enforcement officer. He has not undergone law enforcement training. He is classified as a special government employee, yet he demanded a gun. When he took this demand to the Legal Center of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, a top ICE lawyer refused. That lawyer declined to sign off on the request. That lawyer applied the law. The consequence for that lawyer was immediate. The lawyer was placed on administrative leave. MS Now reports that 2 current and former officials confirmed the lawyer was escorted from the building. Lewandowski then persuaded other lawyers to sign off. And here is the piece of evidence that tells you everything you need to know about the chain of command in this department. The ICE director's auto pen was used to sign the paperwork. A machine signed the authorization for an untrained political operative to carry a federal weapon. This is the power and control analysis. We are looking at an agency where the rule of law has been replaced by the rule of force and personal grievance. Corey Lewandowski is described in these reports as having a relationship with Secretary Noem that officials say makes them uncomfortable. But his power is not derived from a Senate confirmation. It is derived from his proximity to Donald Trump. Josh Dawsey, a reporter for The Washington Post, explains that Lewandowski was brought in as a special government employee. This status is supposed to be limited. It is supposed to be for 130 days a year. It is supposed to be for specialized advice. Instead, the evidence shows Lewandowski is running the department. Dawsey reports that Lewandowski is managing contracts. He is firing people. He is performing operational duties. And when his time limit for this special status was investigated by White House counsel, it was discovered he was not swiping his badge in to hide the days he was working. This is a subversion of government procedure. It is a subversion of the personnel system. You have a political operative firing military pilots and demanding weapons while hiding his attendance record to evade federal employment limits. And Secretary Noem allows it. In fact, she participates in it. The reporting shows that Noem has forced all DHS contracts over $100,000 to require her personal sign-off. She claimed this was to rein in spending. What was the result? Power and control, but not competence. One contract for bulk steel sat on her desk. It sat there waiting for her personal attention. It sat there for so long that by the time she finally approved it, the price of steel had risen. The delay cost the taxpayers more than $100 million. That is $100 million of your money wasted because a cabinet secretary insisted on personal control over paperwork she did not prioritize. This leads us to the strongest defense argument put forward by the administration and House Republicans. Their argument is that the Department of Homeland Security is underfunded and that Democrats are endangering the country by refusing to sign the budget bill. They argue that the one big ugly bill, as Leader Jeffries calls it, is necessary to keep ICE operating and the borders shut. They argue that any criticism of ICE is an attack on law enforcement. We must dismantle this argument using the law and the sources provided. First, the funding argument. Leader Jeffries explicitly states that the One Big Ugly Bill includes a $191 billion slush fund for the Department of Homeland Security. This includes $75 billion to ICE. This is not a department that is being starved of resources. It is a department that is being given massive amounts of taxpayer money, which it then misuses. We have evidence of where this money goes. It does not go to safety. ProPublica reporting, cited in our sources, found that Kristi Noem spent over $200 million of taxpayer money on ads. These ads featured her. They featured her telling immigrants to leave the country. The money was funneled to an ad firm tied to Kristi Noem. The defense argues they need money for deportations, but the Wall Street Journal reports that Noem and Lewandowski have been using a luxury 737 MAX jet with a private cabin. This plane is valued at approximately $70 million. It was paid for with money from the Big Ugly Bill. The stated purpose of this plane is for, quote, high-profile deportations, but the reporting shows it is used for cabinet-level travel. Staff refer to it as the Big Beautiful Jet. So when the Republicans argue they need this funding for national security, the evidence shows they are using it for luxury travel, self-promoting advertisements, and contracts that bleed money due to incompetence. Furthermore, the defense argues that their enforcement tactics are lawful. Leader Jeffries dismantles this with the Fourth Amendment. He points out that Democrats are demanding that, quote, judicial warrants be required before ICE agents can violently storm private property or the homes of the American people. This is a basic constitutional requirement. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The Republicans refuse to adopt this position. Jeffries states it is, quote, completely and totally unacceptable that they oppose judicial warrants. If the defense argument is that they support, quote, law and order, why do they oppose the oversight of a judge? Why do they oppose the Fourth Amendment? The answer, according to the sources, is that they prefer violent, out-of-control brutality. Those are the words of the House Minority Leader, and the evidence supports him. We have reports of a shooting of a Chicago school teacher, Mary Martinez. The body cam footage released contradicts the official account of how that shooting took place. We have reports of a lawsuit from a racetrack in Idaho, alleging that parents and children were zip-tied at gunpoint during an immigration raid. We have reports that the airspace over El Paso was shut down for 10 days because Border Patrol agents fired a laser at a Valentine's Day balloon. This is not law enforcement. This is chaos. Now, we must engage in some legal education in plain English. We need to understand the concept of a special government employee, or SGE. This is a legal designation. It allows the government to hire experts for temporary duties. It is not designed to allow a political campaign manager to run a federal law enforcement agency. By law, an SGE is subject to ethical rules. They are subject to time limits. The reporting that Lewandowski was not swiping his badge to avoid creating a record of his days worked suggests a consciousness of guilt. It suggests an intentional effort to circumvent the legal limitations placed on his employment. If he is working more days than the law allows, his employment is illegal. If he is exercising command authority over Coast Guard pilots without a valid commission or chain of command designation, those orders are illegitimate. Then there is the issue of the auto pen. In government, an official signature carries legal weight. It authorizes spending. It authorizes use of force. It authorizes the carrying of weapons. When an auto pen is used to sign a document that a qualified lawyer refused to sign, it essentially falsifies the consent of the director. It creates a legal fiction that the director approved something that, in reality, was pushed through by a political advisor who had just fired the person who said no. This brings us to the professional judgment on responsibility and fitness. Kristi Noem is unfit to hold the office of Secretary of Homeland Security. This is not a political opinion. This is a judgment based on the management failures documented in these reports. A secretary who allows a pilot to be fired over a blanket is unfit. A secretary who delays a steel contract until it costs the taxpayers an extra $100 million is unfit. A secretary who spends $200 million on advertisements featuring herself, funneled to a firm tied to her, is engaging in conduct that requires immediate investigation. Josh Dawsey reports that inside the White House, officials are incredibly frustrated. They describe a very, very difficult work environment. They note that Noem has fired 80% of the career ICE officials or field staff. You cannot run a federal agency by firing 80% of the people who know how to run it. You cannot run a federal agency by prioritizing your television appearances. The Wall Street Journal reports that Noem routinely berated staff if she saw Tom Homan on TV more than she was on TV. She tracked their appearances. Her focus is not on the border. Her focus is on the screen. And Leader Jeffries provides the professional judgment on the Republican leadership in Congress. He notes that Mike Johnson has, quote, sent House Republicans home. He points out that during the previous 43-day shutdown, Republicans were on a, quote, 7-week taxpayer-funded vacation. Responsibility requires presence. It requires negotiation. The Republicans have left town. They have abdicated their responsibility. Let us stack the expert authority. We are not relying on rumors. We are relying on the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, who controls the votes necessary to keep the government open. We are relying on the Wall Street Journal, a conservative-leaning editorial board with a rigorous news division. We are relying on ProPublica, an investigative journalism outlet known for following the money. We are relying on court filings from the Idaho racetrack lawsuit. We are relying on the body camera footage released regarding the shooting of Mary Martinez. We are relying on Josh Dawsey, a reporter with deep sources inside the Trump administration. And we are relying on the statements of the officials themselves. The DHS spokeswoman, who called the reporting salacious, baseless gossip, did not deny the pilot was fired. She did not deny the blanket story. She deflected. This leads to institutional accountability. Where is the Department of Justice? Leader Jeffries asks this question directly. He states, "We do not trust the Department of Justice." He calls it a weaponized Department of Justice. He asks, who would trust the Attorney General to actually independently investigate wrongdoing by Trump administration officials or by ICE agents? This is the failure of the institution. When the DOJ is viewed as an arm of the presidency rather than an enforcer of the law, accountability vanishes. There should be an investigation into the firing of the ICE lawyer. That is a personnel action taken in retaliation for upholding the law. That is illegal. There should be an investigation into the $200 million in ad spending. That is potential misuse of appropriated funds. There should be an investigation into the firing of the Coast Guard pilot. That is abuse of authority. But the institution charged with these investigations is silent. Or worse, it is complicated. Jeffries demands an independent investigation of ICE agents who broke the law. He demands that state and local authorities have the ability to criminally prosecute any agent who engages in violence. This is a call for bypassing the federal failure of accountability by empowering the states. Finally, we look at the procedural consequences. At midnight, the money runs out. Because Donald Trump and the Republicans refuse to reform ICE, the Coast Guard will not be paid. Because Kristi Noem refuses to manage her department with basic competence, the TSA officers who screen your bags will not be paid. Because the Republican leadership demands a slush fund of $191 billion without judicial warrants, FEMA will face a shutdown. Leader Jeffries has drawn a hard line in the sand. He states that Democrats will not support a bill that allows for the violent targeting of families. He states they will not support a bill that funds a slush fund for billionaires while cutting Medicaid and SNAP. The procedural consequence is a collision. Mike Johnson has left the building. The Republicans are gone. The deadline is hours away. The expectation, according to Jeffries, is that Democrats will respond to the latest unserious offer. But he is clear. The ball is in the Republican court. There is no hope in this script. There is no hype. There is only the mechanical reality of a broken legislature and a corrupt executive agency. The government shuts down not because of a policy disagreement. It shuts down because the people in power demand the right to fire pilots for blankets, demand the right to carry guns without training, and demand the right to spend billions of your dollars without a single judicial warrant to stop them. That is the state of the union tonight. The pilot was fired, the blanket was retrieved, the steel was delayed, the money was wasted, and at midnight, the lights go out. Leader Jeffries says it's on Republicans. The evidence says he is right.